Think about the last time you reheated something. You probably didn't think about it at all. You opened a door, you put something inside, you pressed a button, and 60 seconds later it was done. The whole transaction required almost nothing of you. No skill, no attention, no understanding of heat or time or the particular nature of what you were warming. Just a button, just a minute, just the hum of a machine doing something you never had to learn. Now imagine that machine doesn't exist. Imagine it has never existed, and no one has ever suggested it could. The kitchen you are standing in has a stove with 4 burners and an oven that takes 20 minutes to preheat. The food you are about to make will take as long as it takes, and there are no shortcuts. And the family will be hungry in an hour, and you have been managing this equation every single day for as long as you have had a family to feed. That is the kitchen we are going back to today. Number 10. The icebox supper. Cold plates before electric refrigeration. Before we reach the meals cooked on stovetops and in ovens, we have to acknowledge the meal that required no heat at all. The cold supper assembled from whatever had been preserved or prepared the day before and stored in the icebox that sat in the corner of the kitchen before electric refrigeration became standard in the late 1940s and through the 1950s. The icebox kept food cold with a block of ice delivered by the iceman on a regular schedule, and the discipline required to keep it properly stocked and organized, to use what would spoil first, to preserve what could wait, to plan the week's meals around what the icebox could and could not hold, was a form of domestic management that had no margin for error. The cold supper that came from this system was a plate of leftover roast, sliced cold, with bread and pickles and whatever preserved vegetables were on hand, beets in vinegar, pickled cucumbers, perhaps cold-boiled potatoes dressed with a little mustard and onion. It was not a compromise. It was a complete meal, built from planning and foresight that required skill of a kind the microwave era has entirely eliminated. The person who managed that icebox knew on any given day exactly what was in it, exactly how long each item would last, and exactly what needed to be eaten first. Number 9. Bean pot supper. Long before the slow cooker was marketed as a modern convenience, the bean pot had been doing the same work in American kitchens for centuries, and the bean pot supper was one of the most reliable weekday meals a family could produce at almost no cost and with almost no active labor, once you understood the timing. Navy beans or pinto beans or whatever dried legume was in the pantry went into the pot with water and a ham hock or a piece of salt pork the night before and were left to soak. In the morning, the pot went onto the back of the stove over the lowest possible heat with onion and molasses and dry mustard and salt, and it stayed there all day. The mother who had started it went about the rest of her work, cleaning, laundry, mending, attending to children, while the pot did its work invisibly, the liquid slowly reducing, the beans gradually softening, the pork fat rendering slowly into the broth until the whole thing became thick and dark and deeply savory by late afternoon. This is what cooking without a microwave actually looked like for most of American history. Not frantic, not rushed, but managed. Time distributed across a whole day, the meal building itself quietly while the rest of life continued.
Number 8. Creamed chipped beef on toast. This is a dish that anyone who grew up in or near the American military or who ate in a working-class household through the mid-20th century will recognize immediately, and that everyone else will wonder about until they taste it. Dried beef, beef that had been salted and air-dried until it became thin, papery, intensely salty, and shelf-stable without refrigeration, was torn into pieces and warmed in a white sauce of butter, flour, and milk until the sauce thickened and the beef softened slightly, and the whole mixture became something savory and rich and completely unlike the sum of its parts. It was served over white toast, 2 slices per person, and it was eaten at breakfast or at supper with equal appropriateness. The dish was cheap to produce, required no refrigeration of its main ingredient, and could be made from start to finish in 10 minutes on a single burner, which made it one of the most practical meals in the pre-microwave kitchen's repertoire. Number 7. Homemade vegetable soup from the Sunday roast bones. This is not a recipe so much as a system, a week-long cycle of food production that the pre-microwave kitchen ran with the efficiency of a well-maintained machine. Sunday's roast produced Monday's leftovers. Monday's leftovers were eaten cold or made into hash. The bones that remained after the meat was stripped, chicken carcasses, beef bones, the remnants of a pork shoulder, went into a pot of cold water on Monday evening with an onion halved through the root, a few peppercorns, a bay leaf, and whatever vegetable trimmings had accumulated through the week. That pot simmered on the back of the stove through Monday night and into Tuesday morning, and by Tuesday noon it had produced a golden broth of real depth and real nutritional substance that was strained and used as the base for Tuesday's supper, vegetable soup with whatever the week had produced and whatever the garden or the market had provided. Carrots, potatoes, celery, turnip, dried pasta added in the final 15 minutes. This soup cost nothing beyond the time and the attention of the person who made it, and it fed the family twice from what another household might have discarded.
Number 6. Skillet cornbread and pot liquor. Pot liquor, the cooking pot roast start to finish. The pot roast of the pre-microwave era was not assembled from a slow cooker packet or started in the morning and forgotten. It was a Sunday project, begun at 9 or 10 in the morning with the browning of the meat, a step that required real heat and real attention, and produced a crust dark enough to lend the broth its color and its depth, then moved to the oven for 3 to 4 hours at a low temperature that transformed the tough, inexpensive chuck or rump roast into something that could be pulled apart with the lightest pressure. The cook checked it periodically, turned it, added liquid if necessary, tested the vegetables for doneness, managed the temperature of an oven that did not always hold steady. By the time it came to the table, surrounded by carrots and potatoes that had cooked in the braising liquid and absorbed its flavor, it had required the better part of a morning of management. Not constant labor, not frantic effort, but the steady, attentive presence of someone who understood exactly what the meat needed at each stage. That understanding was not downloaded, it was earned.
Number 4. The full farmhouse breakfast. Before the microwave changed the morning meal into something reheated from a frozen state in 2 minutes, the farmhouse breakfast of the pre-appliance era was the largest and most labor-intensive meal of the day. And in households where the family was headed to fields or factories or schoolrooms, it was also the most nutritionally essential. The full farmhouse breakfast was produced at the stove in overlapping stages. The cast iron skillet going on first with lard or bacon fat, the bacon going in, the rendered fat used to fry the potatoes that had been parboiled the night before, the eggs fried in the remaining fat, the biscuits or cornbread already in the oven from 30 minutes before the family sat down, the coffee percolating on the back burner, the gravy made in the skillet from the bacon drippings and flour and milk in the 4 minutes between the bacon coming out and the biscuits coming in. All of this happened simultaneously on a 4-burner stove in a kitchen that was warm from the oven and filled with the layered smells of everything cooking at once. The person who produced this breakfast every morning was not following a recipe. She was orchestrating a system that she had internalized so completely that it ran without conscious effort, timed to the minute, calibrated to feed a specific number of people who were leaving the house at a specific hour. That orchestration was a skill. It is essentially gone. Number 3. Sunday chicken. Whole bird, whole process. In the pre-microwave kitchen, roasting a whole chicken was not a weeknight option. It was a Sunday production.
The bird prepared the night before if the cook was organized, rinsed and patted dry and rubbed with butter or lard, and left uncovered in the icebox or the cold back porch to dry out slightly, which produced a crisper skin in the oven the next day. It went into a hot oven and stayed there for an hour and 15 minutes without interference beyond one basting, and the pan drippings were used afterward for gravy, and the leftover meat went into Monday's sandwiches, and the carcass went into Tuesday's soup, and nothing from that bird was discarded. The whole chicken roast was the anchor of the week's eating, not just the Sunday meal, but the economic foundation of several meals that followed. The knowledge required to manage it, to know when it was done by the feel of the leg, by the clarity of the juices, by the color of the skin, was the kind of knowledge that could not be written down precisely enough to substitute for having watched someone do it correctly many times.
Number 2. The Depression Stew. One pot, all week. This meal belongs to a specific period, the Depression years of the 1930s, but the logic it embodied was the logic of pre-microwave cooking at its most essential, and it deserves a place on this list for what it reveals about the domestic intelligence of the era. The Depression stew began on Monday with whatever was available, a small amount of meat if there was any, more often vegetables and dried legumes and whatever was in the root cellar, and it was cooked in a single heavy pot and eaten for dinner. On Tuesday, water was added, and perhaps a new vegetable, and it was brought back to a simmer and eaten again. On Wednesday, the process repeated. By Thursday or Friday, the original stew had been added to and reduced and added to again until it bore only a distant relationship to what it had started as, and it was still nourishing, still filling, still hot. This is not improvisation. This is the sophisticated management of a food resource across a week. The understanding that a pot of food is not a static object, but a living system that can be maintained and modified and extended as long as the cook understands its logic. The microwave did not kill this practice. Abundance did. And abundance, it turns out, is its own kind of vulnerability. Number 1. The all-day Sunday dinner. Everything from scratch. At the top of this list, above every soup and every stew and every carefully managed skillet meal, sits the pre-microwave Sunday dinner in its complete and unabbreviated form. Every element made from scratch, in a kitchen with one stove, by one person who had started the preparations the night before and who would not finish them until the family sat down 5 or 6 hours after breakfast. The roast in the oven. The biscuits mixed and cut and ready to go in 30 minutes before the meal. The gravy made in the roasting pan after the meat came out to rest. The potatoes boiled and mashed with real butter and warm milk. The green beans simmered with a piece of pork since morning. The deviled eggs made that morning. The pie, whatever was in season, made from a crust that had been cut into the flour with cold lard by hands that knew the texture it was supposed to reach, cooling on the counter since before church. Every element of this meal was the product of skill and time and the complete, uninterrupted attention of a person who understood what she was doing and why it mattered. There was no shortcut available to her.